I stood barefoot on the porch, the cold seeping up through the boards as the lock clicked behind me. Through the window, I heard my daughter-in-law laugh. "She's like the dog, just let her stay out there." And my son? He didn't defend me. He didn't even flinch. After raising him on my own, after sacrificing every comfort so he could have a future, after calling him my whole world for 41 years, I was nothing more than a burden with a leash. I didn't knock. I just waited until the deed arrived and reminded them whose name was on the house. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The evening sky hung heavy, tinged with the kind of orange that only seemed to deepen as the air grew colder. Gloria Bennett stood on the wide, weathered porch of the brick ranch home she'd spent over 40 years living in, her hands curled around a chipped mug of coffee that had gone cold long ago. The house, her house, loomed behind her like a silent witness to her humiliation. The laughter from inside the house crept through the walls, ringing in her ears. Mark and Tracy had shut the door in her face, locked her out on the porch. The family gathering had started like any other, a casual Sunday dinner that never quite felt warm. But now, standing here, the mocking sounds of her own flesh and blood were a harsh reminder of how small they made her feel. They hadn't even had the decency to pretend to care. Through the glass window she could see them. Mark, her own son, sitting at the dining table while Tracy laughed too loudly beside him. Their voices blended in the air, cutting through the warm, artificial glow of the overhead lights. She could hear Tracy's sharp tone, then Mark's apathetic chuckle. "She's just like the dog," Tracy had said, her voice dripping with disdain, "always at the door, begging to be let in. But we all know she's just a liability." Gloria's heart sank, but she didn't flinch. The pain wasn't new, just more pronounced. She could feel it in her bones, like an ache that never quite left. And yet, the words didn't break her. Her fingers tightened around the mug. She sipped slowly, the bitter coldness of the coffee sinking into her chest. Her pride, the one thing that had always kept her upright, screamed to stand tall, to confront them, to break down that door. But instead, she remained motionless. Silence was her armor. Through the corner of her eye, she saw a figure moving across the street. Someone standing at the window, watching with keen interest. Irene Carter, her lifelong friend and neighbor, had been watching from her porch across the street. Gloria could feel the heat of Irene's gaze even from this distance, a quiet fury in the old woman's eyes. Irene didn't need to say a word. The tight set of her jaw, the rigid stance, and the way she stared with a quiet anger made it clear. She saw what was happening. Irene knew. A movement at the corner of her vision caught her attention, and Gloria looked down to see her granddaughter, Samantha, quietly slipping outside. The girl's hands were full of a thick woolen blanket, which she wrapped around Gloria's shoulders without a word. Her touch was soft, hesitant, but warm. The kind of gesture that reminded Gloria there was still kindness in the world, though it felt like a secret, shared only between the two of them. Samantha didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything: guilt, confusion, and a tinge of shame. She didn't know what to do. But in this moment, the act of kindness was enough. Gloria gave her a faint smile, a small gesture that carried the weight of 1,000 emotions. She didn't know how much longer she could endure this, but she would endure. For now, there was no other choice. Samantha hesitated for a moment, her fingers curling into the fabric of the blanket. Then she returned inside, her presence slipping back through the door as quietly as she'd come. Gloria remained standing on the porch, the cold creeping through her bones, despite the blanket. But she wouldn't let them see her break. Not now. She glanced back toward the street, where Irene stood, still watching. Gloria could feel the older woman's anger, a protective force she had known for years. Irene had always been the type to stand up when something was wrong, even when no one else would. And now, Gloria knew that Irene wasn't just angry for her. She was angry for herself, too. Gloria's hand reached into her coat pocket, fingers brushing the edges of the small leather notebook she had kept for years, an old habit from her time as a secretary. Back when she had found solace in documenting the details of everything, keeping track of things no one else thought to notice. The small injustices, the slight words, the cold silences. She pulled the notebook out, the pages yellowing with time, and began to write. Her handwriting was neat, steady, as it always had been. Each entry was a small act of defiance, a way of taking control in a world that seemed determined to strip it away. Her pen moved across the paper, and she wrote, "They locked me out. They laughed. I am not their dog." The words burned her, but she didn't let herself feel the sting. Instead, she wrote them down, because they were hers now, etched in ink, impermanent. Gloria closed the notebook, slipping it back into her pocket as the wind began to bite. But as she stood there, wrapped in the blanket, she whispered to herself, soft, steady, like a promise made long ago, "This won't be forever." She didn't know how, and she didn't know when, but one day, it would change. And when that day came, she would be ready. The front door creaked open then, just for a moment. Mark's voice called out to her, sharp, angry. "Mom, come inside. You're freezing out here." Gloria didn't move. She simply stared at the door, her fingers still wrapped around the cold mug. Let them think she was the one who needed them. Her resolve was steel now. She wouldn't beg. Not ever again. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and sterile, casting a dull glow on the worn counters of the county property clerk's office. Gloria stepped inside, the door swinging shut behind her with a soft chime, but the sound felt like an anchor, pulling her back into the cold reality of what had been happening to her. She hadn't told anyone she was coming here today, not even Irene, though she could feel her friend's disapproving gaze all the way from across the street. But this was something she had to do alone. The clerk's office was a small utilitarian space, rows of filing cabinets, a couple of empty desks, and the faint scent of paper and dust lingering in the air. The woman behind the counter didn't even look up when Gloria entered, too absorbed in a file in front of her. Gloria approached the counter slowly, but her steps were sure. She had a mission now, a new thread to hold on to. "I need to see the deed records for my house," she said, her voice steady but soft. The clerk's eyes flicked up to her for a moment, then back down, indifferent. "Name?" "Gloria Bennett." The clerk didn't respond right away. Instead, she tapped the keyboard of her computer, a few clicks and clatters filling the silence. Gloria stood still, fingers curling slightly against the counter, a quiet storm building inside her. She wasn't sure what she was expecting. A title in Mark's name? A loan or lien that she hadn't been informed about? The possibilities twisted in her mind like smoke, but nothing could have prepared her for what came next. After a few moments, the clerk printed out a page of records and handed it to Gloria without a word. Gloria's fingers trembled slightly as she took the paper, unfolding it with care. Her eyes skimmed the text, but the words were blurring, the letters dancing before her. She had to read it again, and again. The house, the one she had been told was no longer hers, the one that had been slipping through her fingers, was still in her name. Her heart skipped. It was there, clear as day. Gloria Bennett, owner of 1234 Ashwood Drive. Not Mark, not Tracy, just her. Gloria's pulse quickened as she tried to process it. The room suddenly feeling too small, the air too thick. She stared at the paper as though it might dissolve in front of her eyes. How? How had they let this slip? The clerk watched her now, an almost imperceptible smile playing at the corner of her lips. Gloria looked up at the woman, who simply nodded, as if to confirm what the paper already said. "It's still your name, ma'am," the clerk said, her voice flat. "They act like owners, but on paper, they're tenants." Gloria blinked, feeling a wave of something, a mixture of relief and disbelief, sweep through her. She wanted to laugh, but she swallowed it down, pressing her lips together. She wouldn't give in to that rush of emotion. Not yet. Not here. She nodded, slow, deliberate, as though she were absorbing the truth one breath at a time. "Thank you," she murmured, clutching the paper like a lifeline. The clerk simply nodded again, her attention already back on the pile of papers in front of her. Gloria turned away, the sound of her shoes tapping against the floor a faint echo. But as she walked to the door, the weight of what she held in her hand began to feel heavy. It wasn't just a deed, it was proof. It was the beginning of something. Something that had been building in her chest ever since that cold coffee on the porch. She stepped outside into the crisp air, her breath visible in the light breeze. A sharp wind cut across her skin, but it couldn't pierce the fire that had ignited inside her. The feeling of power, of control, was unfamiliar, but intoxicating. Across the street, Irene stood on her own porch, arms crossed, watching her with that knowing look. Gloria didn't smile, didn't wave, but she felt the connection, felt Irene's support even from this distance. There was a silent understanding between them now, something that hadn't needed words. Gloria reached into her bag, pulled out her binder, and slid the deed document inside, securing it carefully with a click. It was all in place now. Every step, every plan. Mark and Tracy thought they were the ones with power, but they hadn't known the first thing about her. They didn't know she had been preparing this move for years. Irene's voice drifted across the street, a low, firm echo of strength. Now you've got the leash. Gloria stood there for a moment, the words settling deep within her. The leash. That was what this was. The power she'd been handed in the form of an official document. But it wasn't just a leash. It was a chain that could bind them, a chain that could break them. She turned, looking at the house, the place she had once shared so many memories. But now, it didn't feel like hers anymore. It felt like a battleground. As she made her way down the steps, each one creaking beneath her feet, she felt her resolve solidify. The world wasn't about to give her any favors, but it had finally given her a weapon she could use, a weapon that would force Mark and Tracy to reckon with the truth. Gloria knew what came next. She didn't have to think it through. The steps ahead were clear. They might have locked her out on the porch before, but now, she held the deed. And this time, she wouldn't be the one left standing outside. The door to her house was still closed, but it would open. It would open when she was ready. And it would be her, not them, who held the key. As she reached the curb, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, seeing Irene's name on the screen. "You've got this," the text read. Gloria smiled faintly, her grip tightening around the binder. "Yes," she thought. "Now I do." The smell of roasted chicken and garlic filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of conversation that echoed through the house. The dinner table was set with care: crispy rolls, mashed potatoes, vegetables, and the one thing Gloria had come to expect from these gatherings: a careful, measured distance from the people she had once raised. Her son, Mark, sat at the head of the table, his chair creaking under his weight, while Tracy sat beside him, a smile that never quite reached her eyes plastered on her face. The neighbors, a couple from down the street, filled out the rest of the table, laughing along with the atmosphere as if everything was perfectly normal. Gloria sat at the far end of the table, her fingers curled around her wine glass, the warmth from the candlelight doing little to comfort her. She had hoped, in the back of her mind, that this dinner might be different, that for once, they might be civil, might even treat her like family. But as the conversation went on, Gloria could feel it, the undercurrent of something mean, something deliberate, slipping out from behind the smiles. It was when Tracy leaned back in her chair, her eyes gleaming with a mix of malice and amusement, that Gloria knew the show was about to begin. "Gloria," Tracy said, her voice sickly sweet, "you know, it's a good thing you have so much time on your hands. Otherwise, who would be here to look after the house? Someone's got to keep it up for you." Her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear, a mockery of kindness that wasn't even trying to hide its cruelty. The neighbors glanced at each other, unsure of how to react, but all Gloria could do was sit there, her heart sinking like a stone in her chest. "And I've got to say," Tracy continued, her eyes flicking toward Mark for approval, "it's kind of like having a dog around. You know, to fetch the paper or clean up the yard." She laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. "You're lucky you don't have to take her to the vet, huh?" Gloria felt the flush of heat rise in her neck, the old familiar sting of humiliation curling in her stomach. But she didn't respond. She never did. Instead, she kept her head down, eyes fixed on her half-full plate, pretending to focus on the food in front of her as if it were the only thing in the world. Mark didn't even look up from his plate. He just shoveled another forkful of potatoes into his mouth, the silence between him and his wife thick with unspoken agreement. Gloria could almost hear the echo of his indifference, the way he had shut the door on her so easily, the way he shrugged off every act of cruelty as if she deserved it. She could feel the weight of Samantha's eyes on her, the flicker of guilt and confusion in her granddaughter's gaze as she sat beside her. But there was nothing the girl could do. She was trapped between loyalty to her parents and the growing realization that something wasn't right, that the laughter, the insult, were wrong. Gloria swallowed her anger, the taste bitter and sour in her mouth. She could feel the tension building inside her, the urge to lash out, to throw her glass at Tracy, to stand up, and finally say something, but she held it in. It was never worth it. Not here. Not now. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket under the table, her fingers brushing against the familiar leather of her small notebook. She had been carrying it with her since that first day, the day she had locked herself out on the porch. It was where she kept track of the small injustices, the slights that no one else seemed to notice. But to Gloria, they were everything. She pulled it out carefully, discreetly, as the conversation swirled around her. Tracy's voice rose again, this time a little louder, as if to make sure everyone could hear. Maybe when she's done with her paperwork, she can help with the garden. You know, pull a few weeds, since that's apparently all she's good for. The neighbors chuckled awkwardly, unsure of how to join in without feeling like they were on the wrong side. Samantha's face flushed, but she didn't say anything. She couldn't. Gloria's pen moved quickly over the pages of her notebook, her writing steady, precise. The words etched out in dark ink. Tracy mocks me in front of them. She thinks I am a joke, but I am not her fool. She closed the notebook with a soft snap, as if sealing it in that moment. But the weight of the insult sat heavy on her chest, pressing down until she could hardly breathe. She excused herself from the table then, without a word. Mark didn't even notice her slip away, his attention still fixed on the conversation he was having with the neighbor about the latest home renovation project. In the hallway, Gloria took a deep breath, steadying herself. She picked up the phone from the small table near the door and dialed the number Irene had given her, the one for Rachel Coleman, the attorney who had been recommended to her. Rachel answered on the second ring. "This is Gloria Bennett," she said, her voice calm but filled with purpose. "I need help. I need someone to fight for me." "Gloria," Rachel said, her voice reassuring. "We've got this. Just bring me the deed." Gloria swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the phone. "And the laughter," she added, her voice low but firm. "And the humiliation. Bring it all." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Rachel responded with a steady, confident tone. "We're going to make them regret it." Every last bit of it. Gloria stood there for a moment, her breath coming a little easier now, the weight of the phone in her hand grounding her. She wasn't alone in this anymore. She had a plan, and she had someone who would help her see it through. As she hung up, a feeling of calm washed over her. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The humiliation would end. Soon. The office smelled like paper, fresh, crisp, the kind of scent that could bring a sense of quiet order to a world that often felt chaotic. Rachel Coleman's law office was everything Gloria had imagined a real attorney's space to be. Clean lines, neutral tones, and rows upon rows of legal books stacked neatly along the walls. The air hummed with a subtle sense of purpose, the kind that came from years of experience, the kind Gloria needed right now. Rachel was seated at her desk, scribbling something onto a pad, her sharp eyes flicking between documents. She looked up as Gloria entered, a smile that was calm but filled with a quiet strength. Rachel's presence had been a lifeline to Gloria, a steady hand in a world that was becoming more and more unpredictable. Gloria walked across the room slowly, her steps deliberate, as if every move she made in this space felt different from her life at home. She had been moving through her days like someone stuck in a haze, each moment heavy with resentment and bitterness. But this was something real. She could almost taste it. The shift in the air, the change that was coming. Rachel gestured to the chair across from her. "I've drafted the living trust, Gloria. It's done. This is what you need." She pushed a thick, neatly bound folder toward Gloria, who hesitated for only a moment before taking it into her hands. The folder was unassuming, brown, leather-bound, but to Gloria it felt like holding a weapon, something that would defend her when the world had tried to tear her down. Rachel continued, her voice low and matter-of-fact. "By placing the house in a trust, no one can touch it unless they go through the law. You've named Samantha as the successor trustee." She paused for a beat, meeting Gloria's eyes with a sharp look. "Which means Mark and Tracy won't be able to touch anything without her say-so." Gloria's heart tightened at the mention of Samantha. It was a relief, yes, but it also carried a weight. Her granddaughter, so young, would now be in the middle of this fight, The thought of it made her chest ache, but she quickly silenced the doubt. Samantha had already been dragged into this world of deception and cruelty. The trust would protect her. Gloria was certain of that. Rachel's voice pulled her back to the present. We'll file this with the county clerk, get it notarized, and it's official. They'll never see it coming. Gloria nodded slowly, absorbing the finality of it all. She looked down at the folder in her hands, the weight of it grounding her. This is it, she thought. The line had been drawn, and she was no longer just an unwilling participant in her own life. She was fighting. Rachel smiled faintly, as if reading her thoughts. Now they can't touch it without touching the law, she said, her tone firm. And once this is filed, the house is officially yours. There's nothing they can do. Gloria let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She felt something shift inside her. Something solid. Something she hadn't felt in years. Strength. Quiet. But unyielding. She wasn't their victim. Just then, the door opened and a soft voice called out from the hallway. Irene said she'd be here in a moment, Rachel remarked, eyes glinting with something like approval. Gloria looked at her, a flicker of gratitude in her chest. Irene had always been there, a constant in her life, the one who had seen through the lies, the deceit. And now, with Rachel's legal expertise and Irene's unwavering support, Gloria felt like she had a chance to make things right. A few minutes later, Irene appeared, her arms crossed, her expression as sharp and protective as ever. She stepped into the room, walking straight toward Gloria. Without a word, she placed a hand on Gloria's shoulder, a small but significant gesture of reassurance. I knew you'd do it, Irene said quietly, her voice thick with pride. Quiet moves win, Gloria. Always have, always will. Gloria smiled, a small, knowing smile. The words settled over her like a blanket, warming the small spark of defiance that had begun to burn inside her. I've waited too long, Gloria whispered, glancing down at the trust papers in her hands. They think I'm weak, but I'm not. And now, I'm not alone. Irene nodded. No, you're not. Not anymore. Gloria stood, the folder tight in her grip. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment she could finally stop shrinking, stop hiding. This was hers. She was in control. Let's file this, Gloria said with quiet determination. Rachel turned to her computer, tapping a few keys before looking up with a reassuring smile. All set. Just need to sign, and it's official. The pen glided across the paper effortlessly, Gloria's signature firm and decisive. It was no longer a mere legal document. It was a promise to herself, a promise to those who had stood by her, and a promise to Mark and Tracy, who were about to find out just how little control they had over the life they had tried to steal from her. As Gloria handed the papers back to Rachel, the finality of the moment hit her. She had done it. She had taken back what was hers. The fight wasn't over, but it had shifted, and now, she had the upper hand. Rachel stood up, extending a hand toward Gloria. They won't see it coming. Gloria shook her hand, her resolve unshaken. No, they won't. Outside, the sky had begun to darken, the evening sun dipping below the horizon. The world, at least for now, was quiet, but Gloria knew the storm was coming, and she would be ready. She turned to Irene, offering a small but steady smile. I can wait, Gloria said softly. Let them make their move. When they do, they'll find that I've already made mine. And with that, Gloria stepped out of the office, the trust in her hand and her heart steady with the certainty that the battle had only just begun. The dinner table was set with care, though the air in the room felt colder than it should have. Gloria had spent hours preparing the meal: roast chicken, garlic potatoes, green beans, and a dessert she had been perfecting for years. This was no longer just another family gathering, it was a statement, a final act in a long-running drama that had been playing out in the shadows of her home for far too long. Mark and Tracy had reluctantly agreed to come. Gloria had asked them, though the invitation was more of a command than a request. She could feel the weight of their disapproval even before they arrived. They came, as they always did, with the same thinly veiled contempt wrapped around their words, pretending they were doing her a favor. Samantha, seated across from Gloria, fiddled nervously with her napkin, eyes shifting between her parents and her grandmother. There was a tension in the air, thick enough to choke on. Tracy had already made a pointed comment about Gloria's unwarranted expectations when she'd arrived, making sure to speak loud enough so the neighbors could hear from their spot at the table. But Gloria remained calm. She smiled when she was supposed to, made polite conversation, and let the words wash over her like they always had. Her heart was still. Her mind focused on one thing. The moment would come when it all shifted. She knew it. The meal began, the clink of silverware on plates blending with the low murmur of conversation. Mark's usual disinterest was there, barely lifting his eyes from his plate as he shoved food into his mouth. Tracy, ever the queen of manipulation, kept her smile tight and her words sharp, offering casual jabs disguised as jokes. But Gloria wasn't listening. She wasn't really there. Not in the way they thought. She was already thinking ahead, already preparing for the moment she knew would come. Her fingers, steady and sure, were wrapped around the deed she had kept hidden in her lap. The very same deed that had shifted everything. Her house, her future, her reclaiming of control. She waited. Her heart didn't race. It was calm, purposeful. The air felt thick with anticipation, but it was nothing compared to the storm she was about to unleash. At the height of a conversation about a neighbor's new fence, Gloria stood, and the room fell into a momentary silence. Her chair scraped against the floor as she rose to her feet, and all eyes followed her, though they likely thought she was simply moving to serve another dish or clear the table. But instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out the deed. Her fingers unfurled the paper slowly, deliberately, the edges of it barely rustling in the quiet room. She could feel their eyes on her, could almost taste their surprise as she placed it carefully on the table between them. The room held its breath for a moment, and then Tracy spoke, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What's this, Gloria? Are we supposed to be impressed by some old paperwork?" Gloria looked at her daughter-in-law, her face calm, but her eyes were sharp, unwavering. "This house," she said, her voice steady and clear, "is mine. Legally, solely, and permanently." The words landed like thunder in the quiet room. Mark's fork paused mid-air, his eyes flicking from the deed to his mother's face. For a moment, he didn't speak, didn't move. He looked pale, as though he had just seen a ghost. Tracy's lips parted in surprise, her usual quick wit silenced for once. Samantha, sitting beside Gloria, couldn't contain the relief that flooded her eyes. Her mouth parted slightly as if a weight had been lifted. The tension that had been strung so tight between them, between all of them, began to unravel. Irene, standing near the door, couldn't hold back a smirk. She crossed her arms, eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Beggar, huh?" she muttered, her voice low but loud enough for all to hear. Gloria smiled faintly, a slight curve of the lips that said everything. "Tenant, actually." Tracy's face turned a shade of crimson, but it wasn't just embarrassment that flickered across her expression. It was the realization of something darker. The power she and Mark thought they had was slipping through their fingers. The truth was out, and there was nothing they could do to stop it now. Mark blinked, his usual arrogance gone. His gaze shifted between his mother and the deed, the color draining from his face. What do you mean?" His voice was hoarse now, laced with disbelief. Gloria stood tall, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones, grounding her. She could hear the rapid beat of her own heart in her chest, but the rest of her was calm, as if this was exactly how it was always meant to be. "The deed," she said again, her voice even and sure, "is still in my name. The house has always been mine. You never had the right to take it." Tracy opened her mouth, but no words came out. Mark looked as though he might say something, but whatever excuse or defense he had prepared was swallowed by the weight of the truth. Samantha's eyes shone, her lips trembling in relief. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was part of this, part of the victory that Gloria had fought so hard to claim. The girl's hand reached out, brushing her grandmother's with a small but meaningful touch. Gloria's gaze lingered on Mark for a moment longer, and then, with the faintest of smiles, she turned to face Tracy. "You're not the only one who can play games," she said softly. "I've been playing a much longer one." Irene, standing at the back of the room, chuckled softly to herself. A dark, knowing sound. She knew what was coming. And though Gloria didn't need her support in this moment, it was there, quiet and unwavering. Gloria wasn't alone anymore, not in any sense of the word. "Now," Gloria continued, her voice holding a quiet power, "I think we have some unfinished business to discuss." And with that, the tension that had held the room in its grip for so long began to shift. Gloria's move had been made, and now, it was their turn to react. The papers had arrived earlier that week, stacked neatly on the front porch, with the sharp edges of envelopes peeking out from under the door, a reminder of the battle that was about to escalate. Mark and Tracy's attempt to take control of Gloria's life was no longer a subtle maneuver, it was a blatant act of war. Gloria sat at the kitchen table now, staring at the guardianship petition in front of her. The words on the page were loud in their quiet way. Incompetent. Unsafe to live alone. The legal jargon stung, though Gloria had long since grown numb to their insults. It was their way of twisting the narrative, painting her as a fragile, helpless woman who couldn't make decisions for herself. Their cruelty, masked by the veneer of concern, was just another attempt to strip her of her autonomy. Her hands, steady as always, reached for the paper. She traced the text with her fingers, each word another crack in the false facade they had tried to build. This was the line they had crossed, the point where the fight would no longer be quiet. Gloria knew this wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about her very right to exist on her own terms. The silence in the room was thick, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the only sound as Gloria sat motionless. She could feel the weight of their words pressing down on her chest. They thought they could break her, but they had underestimated her resolve. "I'm not incompetent," she muttered to herself, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "I'll prove it." As if on cue, Rachel's number appeared on her phone screen. Gloria hadn't yet called her about the petition. There had been no need to. Rachel had known exactly what to expect. Gloria answered the phone with the same calm she had carried throughout the years. "Rachel," Gloria said, her voice even. "They've filed it. The guardianship petition." Rachel's voice, though steady, held a note of sharp focus. "I saw. Don't worry, Gloria. We'll shred this. All of it. It's just a game they're playing, and we know the rules." Gloria smiled faintly at her lawyer's words, though it didn't reach her eyes. It was comforting, hearing Rachel's certainty, but the weight of the fight was already settling in. This was just the beginning. The next day, Gloria was led into the small, sterile examination room for the capacity evaluation. A soft, nervous hum of voices buzzed in the background, but all Gloria could hear was her own heartbeat. The evaluator, a middle-aged man with glasses perched at the end of his nose, asked the questions slowly, his voice too kind to be real. But Gloria wasn't fooled. She knew what this was about. "Can you tell me today's date?" the evaluator asked, scribbling on his notepad. Gloria smiled slightly. "It's Wednesday, the 10th of September." The evaluator glanced at her over his glasses, his pen pausing in midair. "And do you understand why you're here today?" "I'm here to prove to my son and daughter-in-law that I can take care of myself, that I don't need anyone deciding how I live my life," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. His pen tapped on the paper, but he didn't press her further. Gloria knew what he was looking for. He wasn't here to judge her competence. He was here to fulfill a bureaucratic formality. He wasn't going to find what Mark and Tracy had hoped for. An hour later, Gloria walked out of the evaluation with her head held high, the thick weight of the petition lifting a little from her shoulders. Rachel had assured her it would be a formality, and it had been. She had passed, just as she knew she would. Back in her home, Gloria prepared the necessary paperwork for the court. Rachel had already begun compiling the medical affidavits, doctor's notes, evaluations, and a series of legal documents that would render Mark and Tracy's petition nothing more than a piece of paper with no value. The pieces were falling into place. The strategy was simple. Gloria's mind was sharp, her faculties intact, and the law was on her side. But it wasn't just about winning the legal battle. It was about proving, once and for all, that they could not control her. Later that evening, Irene came over as planned, bringing with her a few comforting cups of tea and the same steely look that had become familiar in recent days. Gloria had always known that Irene would be the one to stand beside her, no matter what. They sat at the kitchen table, the papers spread out in front of them, Irene's eyes scanning the medical affidavit with quiet concentration. "You're not just going to survive, Gloria," Irene said, looking up with a gleam in her eyes. "You're going to strike. Hit them where it hurts. Don't just defend yourself. Show them who you really are." Gloria's heart skipped a beat. The fire that had been quietly simmering inside her all this time was burning brighter now, fueled by Irene's words. This wasn't just about protecting her home. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her autonomy, her life. "I won't let them win," Gloria said softly, more to herself than to Irene. No, you won't, Irene replied, her voice filled with quiet certainty. And when you're done, they won't even recognize the person who walks away from them. Gloria nodded, looking down at the documents in front of her. The fight was far from over, but now, it had a new momentum. A momentum that Mark and Tracy would soon regret underestimating. The doorbell rang, and for a split second Gloria felt a jolt of fear. But she straightened her back, her resolve hardening once more. The battle had already begun, and now, it was time to finish it. As Irene stood to answer the door, Gloria quietly rehearsed her testimony in her mind, every word of it a promise to herself, to the law, and to the two people who had dared to think they could take everything from her. They won't take this from me, Gloria thought, her heart steady as the door creaked open, and she was ready for whatever came next. The courtroom was cold and sterile, a place where the air was thick with the weight of judgments yet to be made. Gloria sat in the defendant's chair, the faint rustle of her clothes the only sound as she shifted slightly. The hard wooden bench beneath her felt like a reminder of the stakes, each moment of stillness stretching the time between now and the inevitable decision. But she was calm, steady, like the quiet before a storm. In front of her, the judge sat at the bench, a poised figure in black robes, watching with an air of detachment. Judge Whitaker had seen cases like this before, family squabbles, the quiet rage between relatives played out in public. But Gloria didn't feel like any other case. She wasn't just some elderly woman being tossed aside for convenience. This was about power, and Gloria knew exactly how to wield it. Mark sat opposite her, a few feet away, his posture stiff and defensive. He had donned his usual face of indifference, but Gloria could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted nervously from the judge to his wife, Tracy, who sat beside him. Tracy, for her part, was busy flipping through papers, her expression unreadable. Gloria had expected their accusation, forgetful, senile, unable to care for herself. But each one cut deeper than the last. Their intent was clear, to strip her of everything, to make her seem incapable in the eyes of the court. But she would not be diminished, not today. The proceedings began with formalities. Rachel, Gloria's steadfast attorney, rose to speak first, her voice confident and clear as she addressed the judge. She wasn't here to make small talk. She was here to win. Your Honor, Rachel began, we are here today because my client, Mrs. Gloria Bennett, has been falsely accused of being incapable of managing her own affairs. We will demonstrate today that these accusations are not only baseless, but they are rooted in nothing more than the desire to take control of her property. Rachel's words hung in the air, a direct challenge to the petition filed by Mark and Tracy. Gloria sat taller, feeling a warmth spread through her chest as Rachel continued, laying out the facts with precision. The evidence will show that Mrs. Bennett has the full capacity to make decisions regarding her own life. She is not the frail, forgetful woman her son and daughter-in-law would have you believe. Gloria glanced briefly at Mark, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. She saw the flicker of frustration in his eyes, the guilt masked beneath the surface. He had underestimated her, and that was the mistake he would pay for. The judge nodded, signaling Rachel to continue. To substantiate our claim, Rachel said, we have a full capacity report from Dr. Gregson, a certified expert in elder law. Dr. Gregson's evaluation states unequivocally that Mrs. Bennett is cognitively sharp and fully capable of managing her affairs. Gloria felt a weight lift slightly from her shoulders as Rachel presented the medical report. Dr. Gregson had spoken highly of her during his evaluation, and it was clear his testimony would leave little room for doubt. Then came Officer Derek Lawson, summoned to testify about the deed, the one Gloria had fought so hard to protect. He entered the witness stand, his uniform crisp and professional, and placed a file of documents on the table before him. Officer Lawson, Rachel began, can you confirm the current status of the deed to Mrs. Bennett's house? Lawson's voice was steady as he responded, yes, Your Honor. The deed to the property at 1234 Ashwood Drive is still in Mrs. Bennett's name. There have been no changes made to the title since her ownership was first recorded. A murmur ran through the courtroom as everyone turned to look at Mark, his face paling slightly. Tracy's lips tightened, her posture stiffening as if she had been struck. But Gloria sat still, watching it all unfold. And this deed, Rachel continued. Would you say it's legitimate? No tampering? No errors? Absolutely, Officer Lawson affirmed. The deed is authentic and fully intact. Gloria's pulse quickened, but she kept her face impassive. She could see Mark's hand trembling slightly, though he quickly hid it beneath the table. Tracy's eyes were hard, though she struggled to mask the fear that flickered there. Gloria was winning, but she wasn't done yet. The judge, still watching the proceedings carefully, nodded toward Mark, signaling him to make his case. Mark rose from his seat slowly, straightening his shoulders. His voice was shaky at first, but he forced himself to steady it as he began to speak. Your Honor, my mother... He stopped, swallowing hard. My mother has become forgetful. She can no longer live alone safely. She doesn't remember basic things. She's a danger to herself. Gloria sat unmoving as Mark spoke, her gaze steady on him. He was trying to paint her as weak. It wasn't working. She's always had trouble remembering names, faces, Mark continued, his voice laced with false concern. And she forgets appointments, forgets things she should be doing. It's only a matter of time before something serious happens. Rachel rose immediately, her tone sharp. Objection, Your Honor. These are mere accusations with no substantiated evidence. I ask that this court focus on facts, not baseless allegations. The judge nodded and Mark fell silent, his face flushed with frustration. Tracy leaned toward him, whispering something under her breath. Gloria could just make out the words as Tracy's voice flicked upward in frustration. You can't even handle your own mother, Tracy muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. The words were caught on the courtroom microphone, clear as day. Everyone in the room turned their attention to Tracy, the insult echoing in the air. Gloria felt a rush of satisfaction as the judge's brow furrowed. Mrs. Bennett, he said, his voice firm, please hold your comments. And, Mrs. Bennett's family, this is a court of law. Let's keep the personal remarks to a minimum, please. Tracy flushed, her eyes darting between the judge and Gloria, but no one paid her any more attention. The damage was done. The court had heard her. Gloria kept her face neutral, her eyes calm. The judge had already made his decision. He could see through Mark and Tracy's feigned concern. As the hearing dragged on, Gloria didn't need to listen to every word. She knew where this was going. She could see it in the judge's expression. The law was on her side, and soon Mark and Tracy would know what it felt like to lose. And this time, they wouldn't be able to take what was hers. The hearing wasn't over, but Gloria knew. This was the turning point. The victory was within her grasp. The room was cold, the hum of the overhead lights a steady reminder of how far this fight had come. Gloria sat at the kitchen table, stack of paperwork before her that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Rachel had sent over a forensic audit, an in-depth look at the financial records Mark and Tracy had carefully tried to conceal. What they hadn't anticipated was that Rachel's team was meticulous, and they weren't about to let them get away with anything. Gloria's fingers trembled slightly as she flipped through the first few pages. It wasn't the kind of audit that would leave much to the imagination. The figures jumped out at her, like ink on the page, accusing Mark of everything she had suspected all along: delinquent property taxes, unpaid bills, debts that had been conveniently hidden. But it wasn't just the tax issues that caught her eye. No, that was only the beginning. Her breath caught in her throat when she turned to the page that showed the refinance attempt. The document had Mark's name on it, his signature hastily scrawled across the dotted line. But there was something wrong. Gloria's heart dropped as she realized that the signature wasn't just messy, it was forged. Her own name, or something close to it, had been signed without her consent in an attempt to refinance the house. Mark had tried to take the house out from under her once again, thinking he could slip it past the system. Gloria shook her head quietly, disbelief and anger curling in her chest. The audacity of it. The betrayal was deeper than she had imagined. The thought that her own son, someone she had trusted, raised, and loved, had gone this far to destroy her was almost too much to bear. But she wasn't going to break. Not now. The phone buzzed on the table beside her, and she picked it up without a second thought. It was Rachel, and Gloria could already hear the sharpness in her tone before she said a word. Gloria. Rachel's voice was crisp, almost cold with a controlled intensity. I've reviewed the audit. We've got everything we need. We're filing a fraud motion tomorrow. We're going to bury this. Gloria closed her eyes, taking in the words. They weren't just words, they were a promise. They were the final step in turning the tide. The fight that had started in quiet frustration was now turning into something else. Rachel wasn't just defending Gloria's rights anymore, they were going on the offense. I'll need to get the affidavit for the forgery. It's your call whether you want to confront him about it, Rachel added, her voice softening. But we'll make sure this hits hard. Gloria set the phone down, her fingers curling around the edge of the table. Mark thought he could steal from her. But this was a different kind of betrayal. It wasn't about the house. It was about everything she had done for him, everything she had given him, and he had thrown it all away for a quick fix. Now, he was about to feel the consequences. She sat back, her mind swirling with the details. She could see it now. Mark and Tracy, cornered by their own lies, by their greed. This was no longer a matter of family disagreements. It was a battle of wills, and Gloria was in the driver's seat. The doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. Not yet. Not for another hour. But she knew who it was before she even moved toward the door. Irene stood in the doorway, her expression as sharp as ever. She held a cup of coffee in her hand, and Gloria could see the glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "Well?" Irene asked, raising an eyebrow as she stepped inside. Gloria shook her head slowly, handing the audit over to her. Irene skimmed the papers quickly, her eyes darting over the figures, her expression growing more intense with each line she read. When she got to the section about the forged signature, she didn't even flinch. She just nodded. "You know, I thought he was a fool, but this is worse than I imagined," Irene muttered, looking up at Gloria with a sly smile. "He's digging his own hole, and fast." Gloria's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was a darkness in her eyes. "I just brought the shovel," she said, her voice low and steady. Irene chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You've got the right idea. Let him bury himself." She paused, looking down at the papers again. "But I'll be damned if I let him do it on your back." Gloria nodded. They had been through too much together for it to be anything less than personal. This was no longer about just her. It was about a family that had grown rotten from the inside out. It was about Mark and Tracy thinking they could tear apart everything she had built. And now, Gloria was about to watch them lose it all. The air felt thick with anticipation, like the moments before a storm. Irene sat down across from Gloria, her eyes steady as she met her gaze. There was no need for words anymore. Gloria knew what needed to be done. They had the evidence. They had the strength. Now it was time for Mark and Tracy to face the consequences of their actions. Gloria didn't feel anger in her heart anymore. She felt something colder, something more dangerous. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, and she was about to take it. As Irene stood up, Gloria took a long, steady breath, and her voice was calm, but unwavering as she spoke. "Let's bury them." The weight of the world shifted that afternoon when the phone rang with a single word that Gloria had been waiting for: investigation. The DA's office had opened a fraud investigation into Mark's actions, and the ripple effect was already spreading through the house like wildfire. Gloria stood by the window, watching the sun filter through the blinds as the call ended. It was official now. Mark and Tracy had stepped into a world they couldn't control. She had known it was coming. She had known the truth would out, no matter how hard they tried to bury it. What she hadn't expected was how fast it would hit them. The door slammed open, and Mark stormed into the living room, his face flushed with panic. His eyes darted around as if the walls themselves might collapse under the weight of his guilt. "What the hell did you do?" he spat, pointing an accusing finger at Tracy, who was seated at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone. Tracy didn't look up. She kept her focus on the screen, her fingers typing rapidly, though her jaw was tight. She had known the consequences of their actions, had wanted them, but now, the reality of what they had set in motion was too much for Mark to bear. "You're blaming me?" Tracy's voice was low, venomous as she looked up. "You think I'm the one who's going to ruin your life, Mark? Look in the mirror. You're the one who signed that damn form. You're the one who got us into this mess." Mark's fists clenched at his sides, his whole body trembling with the effort to stay calm. "You knew what we were doing. You knew, and you didn't stop me." His words were like daggers, sharp and laced with fear. "What the hell were you thinking?" Tracy's lips curled into a tight, furious smile. "I was thinking about us. You promised we'd fix this, that we'd be fine once we had the house, but you went and messed it up. Again." Her words stung, the final blow of an argument that had been brewing for months. Now look where we are. Mark's face went white, and he turned away, pacing back and forth across the room. This can't be happening. It can't. They're going to find out, Tracy. They'll send me to jail. Do you know what this means? Samantha, who had been sitting quietly on the couch, her head down, tried to shrink into the corner as the argument escalated. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had never seen her parents like this, so out of control, so furious. She had always been the quiet one, the one who watched from the sidelines, afraid to speak up. But today, she was no longer content to remain passive. As the shouting grew louder, Samantha felt the surge of emotions bubbling inside her. Anger, confusion, and something else that had been building up for months. She grabbed her phone from the coffee table, the screen flickering with a new recording app she'd downloaded a few days ago. She pressed the button, knowing that what was unfolding needed to be documented. She needed to protect herself, and Gloria, and maybe even, deep down, them. The argument raged on. "You are such an idiot, Mark," Tracy shouted, her voice laced with fury. "We had everything in place. Now it's all going to fall apart." "You don't get it, do you?" Mark retorted, his voice cracking. "I didn't just mess up our lives, I messed up hers. Gloria's gonna take us down for this. The DA's already in on it. We're screwed." Tracy's hands balled into fists. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't see the writing on the wall? You think I'm not scared too?" Samantha's hand shook as she held the phone, her eyes flicking nervously from her parents to the door. She didn't want to be a part of this anymore, didn't want to hear the hatred, the blame, the despair. But she couldn't turn away. She couldn't unhear what they were saying. From the kitchen doorway, Gloria stepped into the room, her face calm, her eyes steady. The chaos had been unbearable. But now, she was a quiet force in the storm. "Enough." Her voice was low, but sharp enough to silence both of them. Mark and Tracy froze, their arguments dying in the air. They hadn't heard her approach, hadn't noticed her presence until it was too late. Samantha glanced up, her phone still recording, though she hadn't meant for anyone to see her. She quickly lowered it, her face flushed with guilt. She wasn't sure if she'd done the right thing, but in that moment, she couldn't help but feel the pull of something bigger. Justice. "Irene called," Gloria said, her gaze never leaving Mark's. "The DA's investigation is going full force. They're going to find everything. The forgery, the taxes, the lies." Mark's face went white, his body still, as if the words had drained him of his energy. Gloria walked forward, standing tall in front of him. "The question is, Mark," she said, her voice colder now, "how much do you think you can keep covering up before it all comes crashing down?" Tracy opened her mouth, but Gloria cut her off, her gaze steady and calm. "You both made your bed. Now you get to lie in it." The air was thick with tension as the silence hung between them. Then, Gloria turned to Samantha, who was still sitting there, her face a mask of confusion and fear. "You're not like them," Gloria said softly as she crossed the room. "And you never will be." Samantha's eyes welled up with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, looking up at Gloria with something like gratitude mixed with sorrow. She didn't know where her parents' actions had left her, but she did know that her grandmother was the one person who had never abandoned her, who had never expected her to be anything other than herself. "I'm going to fix this," Gloria said quietly, her voice firm, determined. Rachel had already prepared the case file, the fraud motion ready to be filed. The judge had set the date for the second hearing, and Gloria knew it was only a matter of time before Mark and Tracy's web of lies unraveled completely. "I'll be ready," Gloria said, her gaze fixed on the future. "And so will they." The doorbell rang again, but this time it was different. Gloria knew this wasn't just another visitor. This was the beginning of the end. Her moment of reckoning had arrived. The sun rose over Louisville with a quiet defiance, casting long shadows across the streets, while inside the Bennett home, the air was thick with anticipation. It was a new day, but the past few weeks had changed everything. Gloria stood by the window, her fingers resting on the ledge, staring out at the neighborhood she had lived in for decades. It had been a peaceful life, until Mark and Tracy had made their move. Now, their lives were about to unravel in the harsh light of public scrutiny. The newspaper came to the door that morning, its headline blaring in bold black letters. "Elder widow outsmarts exploitative family." Gloria picked it up slowly, feeling the weight of the words in her hands. The front page story outlined the fraud investigation against Mark and Tracy in stark detail. Their attempts to manipulate and exploit Gloria, to steal her home, were now common knowledge. And the story wasn't just about them, it was about Gloria, standing firm, unbroken by their cruelty. She didn't smile as she read it. There was no joy in her heart, only a cold satisfaction. The truth had come out, finally. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. As she set the paper down, Gloria felt the door open behind her. She turned to find Irene standing there, her usual sharp gaze softened by a rare smile. "Did you see it?" Irene asked, nodding toward the paper. Gloria nodded, her voice quiet but steady. "I did. It's all out there now. They won't be able to hide anymore." Irene stepped into the room, a knowing look in her eyes. "No, they won't. The neighbors are already talking. You should have heard Mrs. Wilkins at the grocery store. She said she's never been more proud of you." Gloria glanced out the window again, her gaze flicking over the street. The neighborhood, once so familiar and calm, now felt different. People she'd known for years were starting to look at her with new eyes. They weren't pitying her anymore. They were standing by her. Across the street, Mrs. Carter, her elderly neighbor, waved through the window. Gloria waved back. A small gesture, but it meant everything. It wasn't just Mrs. Carter. Others were starting to take sides. They knew what Mark and Tracy had done, and they weren't about to let it stand. As Gloria stood there, her chest filled with a quiet pride, the phone rang. It was Rachel. Gloria picked it up without hesitation. "Gloria, it's happening." Rachel's voice was a low hum of satisfaction. "The DA's office is moving quickly now. The press picked up the story, and the public's response is overwhelmingly in your favor." Gloria felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her voice steady. "How's it looking?" Rachel paused, a slight chuckle in her voice. "I've seen judges bend under public pressure before. But this is something else. They won't be able to ignore it." Gloria closed her eyes for a moment. The pieces were falling into place. The fraud motion had been filed, and now, the weight of public opinion was swinging the scales of justice in her favor. But there was more to this than just a legal win. The humiliation of Mark and Tracy would follow them, and the longer they resisted, the harder it would hit. In the meantime, it wasn't just Mark and Tracy who had to bear the consequences. Samantha's school had been flooded with whispers. Children didn't always understand the complexities of adult problems, but they understood shame. And Mark and Tracy's shame had trickled down to their daughter. Samantha had always been quiet, reserved, but when the bullying started, she held her head high. Gloria had watched her granddaughter from the kitchen window, standing tall in the face of her peers' taunts. Later that day, Gloria found Samantha sitting at the kitchen table, her homework forgotten in front of her. Her eyes were puffy, her lips pressed tightly together as she fought back tears. Gloria sat beside her, her heart aching for the girl who had to bear so much. "Samantha," she said softly, "you don't have to carry this alone." Samantha's voice was quiet, barely a whisper. "Why does everyone hate us now?" Gloria's hand reached across the table, resting gently on Samantha's. "It's not you, sweetheart. They hate what your parents did. But you're not them." Samantha's eyes met hers, and for the first time in days, a small, tentative smile flickered across her face. "I'm not like them." "No," Gloria said, squeezing her hand. "You're not." Back in the living room, Irene had taken a seat, her arms folded across her chest as she watched the news on TV. The local channels were running the story on repeat. Gloria joined her, sitting on the couch beside her. "They thought you were weak," Irene said softly, her voice low but filled with certainty. "Now, you're the headline." Gloria's lips curled into a faint smile. "And they can't lock out the press." Irene laughed softly, the sound carrying the weight of years of friendship. "They should have known. You don't back someone like you into a corner. You just keep fighting." Gloria's mind drifted back to Mark and Tracy. They had underestimated her, thought her silent rage was nothing more than weakness. But now, their world was coming undone, piece by piece. The public was on her side, the legal system was closing in, and soon, Mark and Tracy would face the consequences of their action. She wasn't just a widow. She wasn't just a mother or a grandmother. She was a woman who had fought for everything she had, and no one was going to take it from her. Not now, not ever. Gloria looked up at the screen as the news anchor continued her report. The camera zoomed in on her name, a quiet victory made public. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, Gloria knew she had already won. The courtroom was a heavy silence, the weight of 1,000 unsaid things hanging in the air. Gloria sat at the table, her hands folded in front of her, her gaze steady on the judge. The final hearing had begun. This wasn't just another day in a long line of legal battles. This was the culmination of years of deception, of lies, and of betrayal. This was the day Gloria would see Mark and Tracy pay for what they had done. Rachel stood up first, the familiar rustling of papers a soft prelude to the final confrontation. She walked with purpose to the center of the room, her eyes calm but sharp. She didn't need to raise her voice to command attention. She already had it. "Your Honor," Rachel began, her voice steady, unwavering. "The evidence we have presented today is clear. My client, Mrs. Gloria Bennett, has not only been the victim of financial exploitation, but has been deliberately manipulated and betrayed by those who should have been looking out for her. Mark and Tracy Bennett's actions have been nothing short of fraudulent." Rachel laid the final case file before the judge, her fingers tapping the table for emphasis. The evidence was irrefutable. Officer Lawson had testified about the forged signature on the refinancing document, and now it was time for the last pieces of the puzzle to fall into place. She turned toward Officer Lawson, who was sitting beside her, his expression calm but resolute. The quiet professionalism of the officer was a stark contrast to the storm Mark and Tracy had caused, but Gloria knew it was the calm before their storm. "Officer Lawson," Rachel said, addressing the court, "could you please present the fraud attempt evidence once more?" Officer Lawson nodded, standing and walking toward the exhibit table. He presented the forged refinancing form with Gloria's name. It was the same document that had started this whole mess, the very one that Mark had thought would slip through unnoticed. But now, it was an undeniable testament to his action. Gloria sat still, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what Mark had done. She wanted to scream, to yell out at him. How could he have betrayed her like this? But she stayed silent. She had nothing more to prove. Rachel turned back to the judge, her voice calm but cutting through the tension. "Your Honor, we ask that these actions be acknowledged for what they are: criminal. We ask that Mark and Tracy Bennett be held accountable for their fraud, for the pain they've caused, and for their blatant disregard for the law and for family." Mark sat across the room, his face pale. He couldn't meet Gloria's eyes. He hadn't spoken a word since the morning, too rattled by the overwhelming evidence against him. Tracy, sitting beside him, seemed to be trying to project calm, but the way her hands clenched at her sides told a different story. They had underestimated their opponents. They had underestimated Gloria. But now, it was time for the final blow. The judge cleared his throat, his voice booming through the silence that had settled over the room. "I have heard the evidence. I have heard the testimony, and I will now hear from the victim herself." Gloria stood slowly, her legs stiff, but her posture strong. The courtroom fell into an expectant hush. She walked to the witness stand, taking her place with a quiet grace. She had no words prepared, no speech she had rehearsed in front of the mirror. This was not about theatrics. This was about truth. She took a steady breath before she spoke, her voice soft, but every word was measured, deliberate. "I've spent my life giving. I gave everything I had to raise Mark, to build a family, to create a home. And for years, I thought that would be enough. But it wasn't." She glanced briefly at Mark. His head hung low. "What's worse than the betrayal of my own son is the fact that I didn't see it coming. I didn't know how deep the lies ran." She paused, steadying herself before continuing. "But I'm not weak. I don't beg for respect. Respect is owed, not begged." The courtroom was completely silent. There was no movement, no sound except for the rhythmic pulse of Gloria's words as they settled into the air. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Tracy crossed her arms, her mouth tightening, but there was nothing she could say now. The truth had already spoken. The judge's voice broke through the stillness. "Thank you, Mrs. Bennett. You've made your case very clear." Mark's hand trembled on the table as he tried to gather himself, but it was too late. The weight of his actions was too much, and he knew it. Tracy's eyes flickered toward him, but there was no reassurance in her expression, only the understanding that they had lost. The judge turned to face them, his expression stern. "Mark and Tracy Bennett, I've heard enough. You have tried to manipulate the system and exploit your own mother. Your actions have not only been dishonest but criminal." He turned toward Gloria, offering a rare, soft nod of respect. "Mrs. Bennett, I commend you for your strength. The court will now postpone the ruling for the sentencing phase. I will consider all the evidence and make my final determination, but rest assured, justice will be served." Gloria took her seat, her heart still heavy but filled with a quiet, burning satisfaction. The battle wasn't over yet, but it had shifted in her favor. There was nothing left for Mark and Tracy to do now, but face the consequences of their greed. As the judge dismissed the courtroom for the day, Gloria's thoughts turned to Samantha. She would never let her granddaughter carry the weight of this shame. The fight was for her, too. For her future, for her dignity, for everything that Mark and Tracy had tried to destroy. "I'll stand by you," Gloria whispered to herself, "and we'll get through this." Together, the door closed behind her as the courtroom emptied, but Gloria knew this was just the beginning of a much larger reckoning. Mark and Tracy had no idea what was coming, but they would. Soon. The news hit with the weight of inevitability. Mark and Tracy had been indicted for attempted deed fraud. The charges were clear, the evidence overwhelming. The public was buzzing with the details, but for Gloria, the world outside the courtroom was little more than a blur. The legal battle had reached a new phase, one where the consequences would no longer be avoidable. Rachel had called her that morning with the news. The momentary rush of victory that had filled Gloria after the final court session had now turned into something deeper, something more persistent. The weight of what Mark and Tracy had done was too much to ignore, but the relief of seeing them face real justice was something she wasn't quite ready to feel. It was too raw, too final. "You have to stay calm," Rachel's voice echoed in her mind as she walked back into the house, the soft chime of the front door closing behind her. "The real work begins now. Let the system take its course." Gloria had nodded, of course. She had been calm for so long, calm during the years of quiet manipulation, calm when the betrayal was hidden behind smiles and empty promises. She had been a survivor for too long to let anything shake her now. But even as she tried to settle herself, her mind kept returning to one thing: Samantha. The decision had been made quickly. There was no longer any point in leaving Samantha with Mark and Tracy. The girl had already been through too much. Samantha was coming to stay with Gloria temporarily, at least until everything settled. That afternoon, when Samantha arrived, her eyes were wide with a mix of relief and sadness. The weight of her parents' actions had become too much to bear, and Gloria could see it in the way she moved, like a person who had been carrying something heavy for too long and had finally put it down. "I'll be okay," Samantha said, her voice low and uncertain, as she stepped into the kitchen, her eyes scanning the familiar surrounding. It was a strange comfort, but Gloria knew it wouldn't be enough to heal the hurt. Not yet. Gloria stepped forward, wrapping her arms around Samantha. "You don't have to be okay, sweetheart," she said softly, her heart aching. "Just be here with me. That's enough for now." For a moment they simply stood together, the weight of the world falling away. Then, as they pulled apart, Gloria glanced toward the window where the garden outside bloomed, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to the turmoil within the house. The garden had always been Gloria's sanctuary, the place she had poured her energy, her love, and her soul. The soil had witnessed countless moments of both joy and sorrow, and now, as she looked out at it, something inside her stirred, like a promise, a quiet knowing that everything would grow back. It always did. Samantha followed her gaze. "You're still planting flowers," she said with a small smile, her eyes brightening for the first time since the storm had broken. Gloria nodded, her fingers brushing the cool surface of the counter. "This house blooms for me," she whispered, almost to herself. "It always has." The words hung in the air between them, like the scent of the flowers outside, filling the space with something unspoken yet powerful. For years, she had nurtured this home, this life. Now, with Mark and Tracy's actions coming to light, it was time for Gloria to tend to herself and her family. As the day passed, the outside world continued to turn, but the inside of the Bennett home was filled with a calm that hadn't been there before. The house, once weighed down by deceit, now felt lighter, like the first breath after a storm. The sound of the local TV coverage drifted in from the living room. News anchors were discussing the latest development, the indictment of Mark and Tracy, the shock in the community, and the public outcry over their action. Gloria sat by the window, gazing out at the street, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of a flower pot on the windowsill. The community was rallying behind her. Mrs. Wilkins had been the first to call, offering support, but Gloria could feel it in the quiet nods from her neighbors, in the smiles as she passed them by. They knew the truth now, and they weren't afraid to stand by her. Irene had been over that morning, her usual sharp energy turning softer in the quiet of the house. "You've made it through the worst, Gloria," Irene said, sitting across from her with a cup of tea. "But don't think for a second that this is over. They're going to keep fighting." "I know," Gloria replied, her voice steady. "But so will I." It was true. The battle was far from over. The criminal charges were just the beginning. The real fight would come when they finally stood before the judge, when the sentencing phase began, and Mark and Tracy were forced to face the consequences of their choices. For now, though, Gloria allowed herself a rare moment of peace. She let the rhythm of the world outside flow in, the breeze carrying with it the scent of the flowers, the quiet hum of life continuing as it always had. The path ahead was still long, and it was uncertain, but with her garden blooming, with Samantha by her side, and with Irene's unwavering support, Gloria knew one thing for certain: she was ready. The storm had passed, but the growth was just beginning, and she would be there to see it through. The courtroom was quieter than it had ever been, a tense silence hanging in the air. The jury had deliberated for hours, but now, the moment of truth had arrived. Gloria sat at the front of the room, her hands clasped together, the weight of what was about to happen pulling at her chest. The fight for her dignity, for her future, had led her to this point. Today, she would see justice done. Mark and Tracy sat across from her, their heads hung low, their bodies stiff, as if the reality of their situation had finally begun to sink in. They hadn't said a word in hours. Gloria could feel their anxiety, their fear, radiating across the room. They had tried to manipulate the system, to steal from her, and now, their fate rested in the hands of the jury. Judge Whitaker entered the room with his usual solemnity, and all eyes turned toward him. He looked down at the papers in front of him, then up at the defendants, then at Gloria. The weight of the moment pressed against him, and it was clear that the decision he was about to make was not one he took lightly. The jury had found Mark and Tracy guilty of attempted deed fraud. The news had spread quickly, and the courtroom was electric with the energy of it. But there was more to come. The judge cleared his throat, and for a moment the world seemed to still. "Mark and Tracy Bennett," Judge Whitaker began, his voice low but firm, "you have been found guilty of attempting to defraud your mother out of her home. Your actions were not only dishonest but criminal. You manipulated her, exploited her trust, and in doing so, violated both the law and the basic principles of family." Gloria sat still, the words she had been waiting for ringing in her ears. She wanted to feel joy, to allow herself to finally breathe easy, but she remained composed, her eyes never leaving the judge. Judge Whitaker continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "As a result of your action, I hereby strip both of you of any inheritance rights from Mrs. Bennett's estate. This means you will receive nothing, no property, no assets, and no financial benefit. You have forfeited your right to any of it." Gloria felt a flicker of something deep inside her, a quiet victory, a moment of justice. They had taken so much from her, tried to steal her home, her security, and now, finally, they would face the consequence. "But that is not all," the judge said, turning to Gloria with a respectful glance. "I am also ordering restitution. The amount of restitution will be calculated, but let it be known that the fraud you committed will cost you much more than money. The pain you have caused your mother will be difficult to measure." Gloria's heart swelled. The restitution was a small part of the whole, but it was a symbolic victory. Her dignity restored, her worth recognized. They would pay for what they had done. The judge paused for a moment, looking down at the papers in front of him. Then he looked back at the two defendants, his expression hardening. "Finally, in light of the emotional distress caused by your actions, I am ordering that Mrs. Bennett retain full guardianship of her granddaughter, Samantha. Mark and Tracy Bennett will have no legal standing to contest this decision." At this, Samantha, who had been sitting beside Gloria, Her face pale but calm, let out a small, relieved sigh. She had been so afraid that her parents would try to take her away again, that they would force her into their world of deceit and anger. But now, with the judge's words, the world had shifted once more. She was safe. She would stay with Gloria, where she belonged. Gloria reached for Samantha's hand, her fingers curling around the girl's in a quiet gesture of solidarity. She had fought for this, for Samantha's safety, for her future. And now, the weight of the years of struggle began to ease, just a little. As the judge prepared to adjourn the court, Gloria stood, her back straight, her heart calm. The battle wasn't over. There were still legal proceedings to be followed, restitution to be paid, and final hearings to be had. But for the first time in years, Gloria allowed herself to feel something close to peace. "I never left my house," she whispered under her breath, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She had been locked out, betrayed, humiliated, but she had never left her home. She had never left the woman she was. Irene's voice broke through the stillness, a whisper meant only for Gloria's ears. From porch to bench. "You won." Gloria nodded, the weight of the past months lifting, but not vanishing entirely. There was no easy resolution, no sweeping away of what had been done. But in this moment, Gloria knew one thing for certain: she had won. Samantha squeezed her hand tighter, her gaze filled with gratitude. And for the first time in a long while, Gloria could see a future stretching ahead of them, free from the shadows of Mark and Tracy's manipulation. The courtroom slowly emptied, the sound of footsteps echoing as the finality of the moment settled in. Gloria didn't watch Mark and Tracy as they left. She didn't need to. They had already lost. With Samantha by her side and Irene waiting for her outside, Gloria took a slow, steady breath, ready to return to the life she had fought so hard to protect. It was time for her to finally live again. The porch had never felt so much like home. The sun was low, casting a warm golden glow across the front yard, and Gloria leaned back into the creaking chair, its worn wood familiar beneath her fingers. She had spent countless hours on this porch over the years, but today, it felt different. Today, it was a symbol of everything she had fought for, everything she had reclaimed. Samantha sat beside her, her legs tucked beneath her, her eyes focused on the garden just beyond the porch. The flowers were in full bloom, a riot of color that mirrored the quiet peace that had finally settled over the house. The chaos of the last months had faded, leaving only the calm remnants of victory. They had fought back against everything Mark and Tracy had tried to take, and now, Gloria had everything she needed. Irene was in the chair across from them, her gaze sharp, but her demeanor softened by a sense of satisfaction. She had been with Gloria every step of the way, never wavering, always there when the fight seemed too much to bear. The air between them was comfortable now, no longer filled with the tension that had marked their earlier struggles. "You did it, Gloria," Irene said softly, leaning back in her chair and looking out at the quiet street. "You finally did it." Gloria turned her head to smile at her. "It wasn't just me," she said, her voice calm but with a depth of gratitude that reached beyond the words. "We did it." Irene nodded, her eyes glinting with approval. "That's true. But you—" She paused, her lips curving into a grin. "You were the one who stood up. They never saw you coming, did they?" Gloria didn't answer immediately. She had been so focused on the fight, on surviving the lies, the betrayal, that she hadn't taken a moment to just breathe. She had always believed in fighting for what was right. But now, in this quiet moment, she realized just how far she had come, how much she had endured. Samantha looked up at her, her eyes shining with something new, something like admiration, but deeper. "Grandma," she said softly, her voice filled with awe, "you're stronger than all of them." Gloria's heart swelled, and she reached over to gently touch Samantha's hand. "I'm strong because I don't lock doors," she replied, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of years of experience. "I open them." Samantha's expression softened, and for the first time in a long while, a true smile crept onto her face. Gloria watched her for a moment, her granddaughter so much like the woman she had always wanted her to be, unbroken, unbowed, ready to face the world. A car pulled into the driveway, the familiar sound of tires on gravel pulling them all from their quiet thoughts. Gloria didn't need to look to know who it was. Rachel. The attorney stepped out of the car, her confident stride carrying her toward the porch. In her hand, she held a thick envelope, final papers. Gloria felt a flutter of anticipation in her chest. It was the end of the legal battles, the finalization of everything they had worked for. Rachel gave them a small, knowing smile as she approached, her gaze flicking between Gloria and Samantha before landing on Irene. "Looks like you've made it through the hard part," Rachel said, her tone warm but professional. Gloria stood, walking down the steps to meet her. "I'm ready," she said simply. Rachel handed her the papers, the final legal documents that would solidify her victory, Mark and Tracy's defeat. The weight of them felt heavy in her hands, not because of what was inside, but because of what they represented. The end of a long battle, the beginning of something new. Gloria signed the papers with a quiet confidence, the pen moving fluidly across the lines. Each stroke was a final declaration that her life, her home, her future were finally her own. There was no fear now, no hesitation, just peace. Samantha stood beside her, watching, her fingers brushing lightly against Gloria's arm. "It's over," Samantha whispered. Gloria smiled faintly, the weight of the last few months lifting with each word. "It is." As Rachel gathered the papers and turned to leave, Gloria turned back to the porch, to the familiar view of the street where her neighbors were still coming and going. But today, they weren't just neighbors. Today, they were supporters, standing with her, recognizing her strength and her right to stand tall. Irene stood beside her, arms crossed, a proud look on her face. "I knew you'd get here, Gloria." "They never stood a chance." Gloria nodded, her gaze turning to the horizon, where the last light of day softened the edges of the world. "I never left my house," she whispered again, the words not just a statement, but a reminder, a promise. The evening settled into a quiet that felt like home. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of flowers, and for the first time in a long time, Gloria felt the peace she had longed for. Everything was as it should be. "Let's go inside," she said softly, her hand resting on Samantha's shoulder. "It's time for dinner." And as they walked back into the house, their footsteps light and easy, Gloria knew this chapter was complete. The fight had ended, but the life she had fought for was just beginning, safe, secure her own. The doors were wide open, the rest of the world would have to adjust. The room was quiet, save for the soft murmur of anticipation that buzzed through the audience. Rows upon rows of chairs filled with men and women, some older, some younger, but all with the same look in their eyes. They were there for one reason, to listen, to hear the story of a woman who had fought for her home, her dignity, and her future. Gloria stepped up to the podium, the weight of her words pressing down on her chest, but also carrying a quiet strength. She had come a long way from the woman who had once felt helpless and alone on the porch. Today, she stood in front of an audience of strangers, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a warrior, a woman who had taken control of her life again. She adjusted the microphone, her fingers brushing the cool metal, and took a deep breath. The stage lights above her seemed to stretch out in every direction, casting long shadows across the room, but it didn't faze her. This was her moment, and she would own it. "I never thought I'd be standing here," she began, her voice steady, but tinged with the wisdom of someone who had walked through fire. "Not like this. Not as a speaker at an elder rights conference, but sometimes life throws you a curveball, and you either catch it or you let it hit you." She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the audience. They were all listening now, their faces attentive, leaning forward as if they could feel the weight of her words. She could see them, older men and women who had likely faced their own battles, their own struggles against the injustices of life. Her heart swelled with the thought that her story might offer them something more than just a tale of survival. "My name is Gloria Bennett," she continued, the familiar weight of it grounding her. "And for years, I was locked out of my own life. My family, the people I trusted the most, tried to take what was mine, the house I built, the life I created. But I didn't just stand by and let it happen. I fought back. And I'm here to tell you that you can too." Her words hung in the air, the silence in the room thick with the gravity of them. Gloria allowed herself a moment to take it all in. The world she had known, her home, her family, had crumbled, but in its place, she had built something stronger, something unshakable. "I fought not because I wanted revenge," she said, her voice growing firmer, "but because I deserved respect." We all do. No one has the right to strip us of our dignity, no matter how old we are. No one should ever make us feel small or powerless. The law is there to protect us, but sometimes we have to be the ones to make it work for us. She could feel the energy of the room shift. The faces in front of her weren't just listening, they were absorbing. She could see it in their eyes: recognition, understanding. And maybe for the first time in years, Gloria felt like she wasn't alone. I know what it's like to feel powerless, to feel like you're invisible, like no one cares about your rights. But when you stand up for yourself, when you speak out, things change. She took another breath, her eyes finding Irene in the back of the room, a steady anchor through it all. And when you do, you'll find people who will stand with you. People who won't let you fight alone. Samantha sat in the front row, her eyes locked on Gloria, a bright smile spreading across her face. Gloria's heart swelled with pride. The girl who had once felt so small, so scared, was now a young woman who had witnessed the full force of her grandmother's strength. Respect isn't something you beg for, Gloria said, her voice softening but carrying a quiet power. Respect is brick and paper, sealed. It's earned, not given. The words settled in the air, the weight of them resonating with the audience. The room felt heavier now, but in a way that was full of meaning. This wasn't just a story. This was a movement. As Gloria stepped back from the podium, the room erupted into applause. It was slow at first, hesitant, but then it grew, louder and louder, until it filled every corner of the room. Gloria stood still, her hands clasped in front of her, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been made to feel small, silenced, ignored. She walked down from the stage, her steps steady, as Rachel stood to greet her with a warm smile. "You did it," Rachel said, her voice low, proud. Gloria smiled faintly, her eyes meeting the crowd, still clapping in the background. She knew the fight wasn't over. There would always be battles to face, challenges to overcome. But in this moment, in this room, she had won. Samantha stood, her eyes filled with admiration, her face glowing with pride. Gloria reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Grandma," Samantha whispered, her voice filled with awe. "You're incredible." Gloria smiled, the weight of the moment settling over her, grounding her. "No," she said softly. "I'm just a woman who doesn't lock doors." Irene stepped forward, her eyes glinting with approval as she squeezed Gloria's hand. "From porch to bench, Gloria. From porch to bench. You've come full circle." Gloria nodded, her heart calm, steady. She didn't need any more validation. She had already found her peace. As she stepped outside, the evening air was cool against her skin. The last traces of daylight stretched across the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of purple and gold. Gloria paused for a moment, her hand resting on the doorframe, gazing out at the world she had fought to protect. And when the deed arrived, it showed whose house it truly was: mine.